Hi, I'm Dana Connors, President of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to our weekly program called The Maine Take. Every Monday at 3 o'clock, I say that with the following exception, that if a holiday falls on Monday, we will have the program such as next week. When we recognize President's Day, we'll have that on Tuesday at the same time. I will be your host, and we will be exploring those issues of interest in our state, the ideas, the initiatives, the issues that affect you, your livelihood, and everything that is important to you, we hope. This week, we start right off with an in-depth discussion with Senator Angus King. Senator, it is a real pleasure to have you with us. We know how busy you are, how busy DC is at this time. And let me begin by really asking you to reflect on something that it's hard to imagine that with all that's gone on in 2020, almost a month from now, we came face to face with a pandemic that we're still grappling with. That was followed by the racial injustice took on a life of its own. Black Lives Matter became a movement. That was followed by something that for many of us, it really didn't happen, but yet we know that it did. It seems inconceivable that it did. It shouldn't have. Many of us felt it couldn't, but like I said, it didn't. And now in just a little bit over a year, we're facing our second impeachment of our president, the same president, unprecedented. All of this within a year. Reflect on for us, because we know you're a very thoughtful person and you've had to deal with this face to face in DC where this all took place. Reflect on that for a moment. Tell us what your thoughts are as you lived it during 2020.
Well, it was an extraordinary year by any measure. I mean, it started out with the impeachment of a president, only the third impeachment trial in American history. And then very shortly thereafter, in late February, early March, we were struck by the pandemic, a once in a century kind of catastrophe that had ramifications throughout the country. And we're still in the middle of it. We're hopeful that the vaccines are going to help us move to the other side and get back to some semblance of normalcy by hopefully the summer. But, it was a year like no other, for sure. There were some bright spots. The Congress was able to get together and pass some serious COVID relief packages, first one in March and then several later on, and then one finally at the end of the year. And I think they made a difference. There's no question from the data that I've seen that those packages really helped to blunt the worst of the economic effects. And of course, now we're starting to see the vaccine distribution. There's still issues and problems, but that seems to be going better than it was a month ago. So, an amazing year. And then, of course, you failed to mention in your intro that we had this little matter of a presidential election going on this year.
That's true. Yeah,
and
right.
So the presidential election was hard fought. It ended really a week later or a few days later. I think the networks called the election on the Saturday after the Tuesday. But unfortunately, the president didn't accept the results and spent the next 2 months sort of delegitimizing the electoral process and getting a lot of folks stirred up about the fact that he thought the election was stolen, although there was no evidence to that effect. All the evidence, in fact, pointed in the other direction. And this culminated, of course, in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And that's the subject of the impeachment trial that starts tomorrow in the U.S. Senate. So you couldn't possibly have predicted what's gone on this year. And it's been a tough year. I mean, everybody agrees to that. The hospitality industry in Maine was just hammered, although things seem to improve toward the end of the summer somewhat. But we've lost small businesses. On the other hand, some of the programs Congress passed, like the PPP, were very helpful to our small businesses, helping with people with unemployment. So a lot has gone on, and I think if there's any good news out of this, it's that the federal government and the state government really stepped up to confront this crisis in a way that has helped us to get through it well, we're not through it yet, but at least get to the point where we hopefully see the end of it in the next 6 months.
Yeah, I would totally agree with your assessment of how the federal and state government has really taken a hold and have done everything they can, even to borrow the sums of money that now everybody worries about at the federal level. And here at the state level, how the governor has really kept public health first and foremost. Not that she denied the value of economic or mental health, but as she likes to say, in order to have good economic health, you've got to have good public health. So one kind of precedes the other. I think the other thing that I've been witness to, and I've heard you say this more than once, is that Maine's a big state, but a small community, and the sense of responsibility that people in Maine took towards their fellow neighbor, their friend, their family, and so forth is pretty remarkable. And it does really reflect the real fiber of Maine people. And,
well, I saw that just in our hometown of Brunswick, where people were buying gift certificates from restaurants, for example, to keep them going. And the restaurants immediately turned to takeout and delivery. And so there really was that community feeling.
Yeah.
I want to say a word about the governor's response, having been in that seat through nothing like the crisis that she faced. The difficult challenge that she had was when she had to make those decisions about curfews and shutting down group businesses and those kinds of things. It's very easy, particularly if you're a business owner, to see the immediate impact of that on you. You know when your restaurant doesn't have any people in it. And you know when you have to try to make your mortgage payment, what a hardship that is. What you don't know is whether or not the governor's actions may have saved your sister's life. It's hard to measure something that doesn't happen. But I follow, there's a tracker in the Washington Post of the COVID impact around the country. And consistently, Maine has been among the very best states, although we had a pretty serious blip in the last, blip is an understatement. We had a rise in cases over the last 6 weeks or so. But by and large, we've come through this about as well as any state in the country in terms of cases, in terms of deaths, in terms of hospitalizations. And I give Janet Mills a lot of credit. She took some very tough positions and, as you know, took a lot of heat. And
Yes.
as I say, the problem is when you make those kinds of decisions, you can see the impact, but you don't really see the impact of the lives you've saved, of the cases you've saved. So to me, it was a case of really very solid crisis leadership. I know everybody doesn't agree, but the numbers prove it out. Maine came through this about as well, literally in the top 2 or 3 in the country. And I think that's important to recognize.
Well said, and we would agree with that as well. Let's talk a bit about where we stand on the latest coronavirus package. I just read today where there is to be an effort, if it hasn't started already, to add for children's benefit along the lines of the stimulus payment to add $3,000 or $3,600, depending on whether you're under 6 or over 6, between 6 and 17. Is that a new addition to it, to the package, or has that been?
It's unclear, Dana, whether that is going to be on top of or proposed to be on top of what's already been proposed, or whether it would substitute for some of the other benefits that are already in the package. I'm of two minds about this. I'm concerned about the deficit, and I have been for a long time, and I've worked with groups down here working on the deficit. On the other hand, times like this are when you run a deficit, when you're in a crisis, when you need to keep the economy afloat. My problem is, for example, that we did a massive tax cut at the height of a boom when the economy was doing great. That's when we should have been paying down the debt as opposed to compounding it, which is what we did. Now we need that stimulus to the economy in order to keep, heart and soul together for the next 6 months. And so I'm supportive of the president's proposal, but I do think there are places where it could be modified and improved. For example, the $1,400 stimulus payment, I think, should be targeted somewhat more precisely than everybody under 75,000 or 150,000 for a couple. And there's a lot of data coming out now that your real stimulus to the economy is people who need the money and are likely to spend it. And so I think that's an example of where I think the project can be improved. I'm leery of adding, I don't know, I haven't heard a price tag on the $3,000 per child, but it's got to be way into the hundreds of billions. And I do think there is a limit, and 1.9 trillion is a lot of money. And remember, every dollar of this, Dana, is borrowed from our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, you're absolutely
and I think
right.
we have a responsibility to be good stewards and do what is necessary to get us out of this hole, but not do something that could aggravate the hole for future generations.
I mean, you mentioned something that I've read over the weekend, that the president is willing to negotiate not on the amount of the stimulus, but the income levels. And you just spoke to that. Last week, it was apparent that the Republicans, led by Susan Collins, was weighing in with a proposal. I'm not hearing much about that this week. Where does all that stand? Is a budget reconciliation going to be the means to the end, or do you think there'll be some bipartisan reflection?
Well, there are a couple of things. Number one, budget reconciliation, as you know, is a technique whereby something can be passed with a simple majority. The tax bill that I talked about, the Trump tax cut, was passed by the Republicans under reconciliation. The step that they took to repeal the Affordable Care Act in 2017 was using reconciliation. So it's not like this is a new
Right.
program invented by the Democrats for this purpose. It was used most recently for the Trump tax cut. So, but the other thing about reconciliation is it can be the reconciliation resolution that will be before us in a couple of weeks can be amended by a simple majority. So if the Republicans, for example, have an amendment about the targeting of the $1,400, all they need to do is pick up one Democratic vote. And I know a lot of Democrats who feel as I do about that, and that'll be part of the bill. So they may not vote for it in the end when it's a total package, but there's a lot of opportunity for bipartisan input as this package develops over the next 2 or 3 weeks. As you know, there was a group of Republicans that went to the White House, made a proposal to the president. The problem was, Dana, it just wasn't enough.
Right.
If you're selling a car for $19,000 and a guy comes and says, "I'll give you $6,000," you probably aren't going to be very interested in that negotiation. If he came and said, "I'll give you $12,000," then maybe you can work between 19 and 12 and find common ground. But the problem was the offer of the Republicans, I just don't think was high enough and didn't cover, for example, any aid to states and localities at all, zero. And I just don't think it was very tempting to the president. He and I would much rather this be a bipartisan deal. But in order to have a bipartisan deal, you've got to have both parties realistically negotiating and trying to find some middle ground. So there's still possible, but the truth is, Dana, that the majority of the Republican caucus, I think right now, don't think there should be anything further, period.
Is that right? Wow.
I don't think I think a lot of them feel, the economy is going to come back and, maybe we should do something on vaccine distribution, but I think there are many members, and you got to remember, the proposal that was made 2 weeks ago was by a group of 10 Republicans who are the most sort of moderate, And so I think it's going to be difficult, but there may well be bipartisan amendments to the reconciliation resolution before it reaches its final form. I expect there will be.
That would lead to a bipartisan solution for sure. I know I've got you for a limited time. I could go on for the whole program, but I did want, give me your best guess as to when this is likely to be resolved. I mean, you've got the impeachment, you said that starts tomorrow. Will this latest package be something that we can see, do you anticipate to see in a recent couple of weeks?
Well, there's a kind of hard deadline, Dana, of March 14th, which is when the current boost to unemployment insurance runs out. So I think everybody sees that as the end date, as the outside date. There'll be a lot of work that goes on even in the background during the impeachment trial. The staff will be working, the House will be working on the package. I'm guessing sometime in late February or the first few days of March is a likely time that we would see this finalized. The impeachment trial, as I said, starts tomorrow, Tuesday. It'll probably go at least a week, but there's plenty of work already going on. So I'd say first week of March would be my best guess.
And as to the outcome of the impeachment proceedings, what would be your guess?
Well, we had a sort of preliminary vote a couple of weeks ago, and there were 5 Republicans who voted. The motion was that the impeachment itself was unconstitutional and shouldn't be held. And 45 Republicans voted yes on that motion. 5 voted against it. And I just found out this afternoon we're going to have to do that again tomorrow, which I find kind of annoying. We've already had that vote. Why do we have to waste a day going over the same issue that we've already voted on? But I guess that's where we're going to start tomorrow. I think it's highly unlikely there would be 17 Republican votes for conviction. And look, I would just as soon not be doing this, but I can't turn a blind eye to what the president did. And this isn't a difference about immigration or abortion or some other political issue. This is about our fundamental democratic system itself. And he spent 2 months undermining the democratic system, getting his followers whipped up to a state of real, just absolute passion about this, and then invited them to Washington. And I think, Dana, one of the key moments was a tweet that he sent in December. I think it was December 22nd. He said, come to DC on January 6th. It will be wild. Well, January 6th wasn't an arbitrary date just pulled out of his head. That was the date of the counting of the electoral votes, the official certification of the election. So people were being invited here expressly to disrupt the counting of the electoral votes. And then, of course, there was the day of the election. I was on the floor of the Senate that night, Dana, the night of the 6th. And I said, I don't approve of what happened. I don't countenance it. I don't support it, but I understand it. And I understand it because these are people whose leader had been telling them for 3 months, 2.5 months, or actually going back into the summer, that their country was being stolen from them. That was the language. And that they couldn't trust the courts. They couldn't trust the politicians. They couldn't trust the election officials. They couldn't trust the media. And if you think about that, Dana, that only leaves you with violence.
Exactly.
They felt that was their only option. And indeed, they went to the Capitol, and that's what they did. So I like I say, I wish we didn't have to do this, but to not do it, to not at least try to hold this person accountable for a direct attack on the democratic system is an enormously dangerous precedent in my mind. We've had a tension in this country from going back to the Constitution about what are the powers of the president. We don't want an elected king. And this was a step in that direction where the president of the United States tried to undermine the constitutional system itself and throw the election, change the election results. And to just say, oh no, okay, no harm, no foul, I just don't feel that that is a responsible position.
Yeah, that whole incident and the time that it took place was so unsettling, almost unbelievable to think that it would happen right here in our own country at our capital. It was just unimaginable, but it did. I know your time is precious and we respect it, but I do want to ask you about something I read in the paper today. You were speaking to a class of students and knowing how concerned you are with climate change and all of that, but it was fascinating because you said by virtue of the Arctic waters warming that it opens up an opportunity for Maine. Speak to that. I think that's fascinating in terms of its potential, its opportunity.
Well, if a ship is coming from Asia to the east coast of the United States, it's about 14 days shorter to go over the pole than to through the Panama Canal. Now, the Arctic Ocean, of course, has been closed to transit for all of human history. It's suddenly opening up. Dana, 3/4 of the Arctic ice has disappeared in the last 40 years. Think of that,
Oh,
three
yeah.
quarters. And it's not quite, we're not there yet where it's open transit. We still need icebreakers and it's still somewhat iffy. But it's clear that transit through over the pole, either along the U.S. and Canadian shore, along Alaska and Canada, or along the Russian shore, is going to become a part of our shipping world. And guess what? If you go through the pole, come down between Greenland and Labrador and Canada, the first ports you reach in the United States are in Maine.
Exactly.
Eastport, Searsport, and Portland. And we're already seeing a growth of the Portland port with Ameskip, the Icelandic company, for shipping to the high north and Iceland. And that's just a taste of what I think is the potential. So in some ways, it's back to the future. Maine was built, one of our original reasons for our economy was our access to the ocean. We were a shipping world. You go to all those towns along the coast, Bath, Wiscasset, Camden, see all those big white houses? Ship captains built those houses.
Yes.
And so I see this as a real opportunity for Maine in the long run. You and I will be retired, but in the next 10 to 20 years, I think this is a real opportunity. It's why I've taken a deep interest in the Arctic and spent a lot of time. I'm the sort of co-chair with Lisa Murkowski of Alaska of the Senate Arctic Caucus. And because I see it as a practical opportunity for Maine, among other opportunities.
Well, Senator, I hate to close this out, but I'm sure your staff is pulling their hair out trying to get you away from this interview. I cannot tell you.
They're just afraid I'll say something stupid, Dana. That's why they want.
No, it's not a chance of that. I so appreciate you being on the show. You are such a wonderful guest, and we're so proud that you represent us in DC. I don't think you ever said that to me, however, when you used to interview me ruthlessly on Maine.
I was just going to say, this is sort of a fun reversal where 30 years ago, it was me asking the questions and you answering it when you were at the Department of Transportation. And
well,
maybe town manager of Presque Isle. I can't remember if it goes back that far.
No. That was a year after Noah and the Ark that would have been. But no, let me just say this. It is nice being on this end of the interview because I always left yours feeling extremely inadequate because I was always on the wrong side of the issue. You always were, it seemed, on the right side, and I was defending something that I felt terrible about. So it's nice to be on this side again. But you did such a nice job that I can't say anything other than that.
Well, listen, I just want to thank you, Dana, for the leadership you provided over the years and the chamber. I mean, the chamber is a real force for good in the state. And you started the interview by talking about Maine being a community, and the chamber and the local chambers are really very much a part of that community. The biggest thing I miss from the pandemic is not being able to get out. I mean, I do Zooms upon Zooms. As you mentioned, I did one the other day with a class at Edward Little High School. I try to do that fairly regularly from down here. But, I think all of us miss being able to meet in person and shake hands. I mean, imagine what a hardship it is for a politician to not be able to shake hands. I mean,
Yeah.
really. But thank you. I just want to thank you and I think this idea of the main take is a great idea, and I'll be glad to join you anytime you need to fill 20 minutes or so.
Oh my God, you sure you know what you're saying right there? We'll certainly take you up on it. You are a wonderful senator and a very, very special friend. And I thank you so much for being with us today. And the best
Thanks,
of
Dan.
luck. Take
Great
care.
to be with you, man. See you later.
Take care. Yeah, you just saw a great senator at work on behalf of the state of Maine and the nation. And at this point, I want to invite my advocacy team in to share with us a take on what is happening in the state of Maine at our capital right here in Augusta. So Peter, Ben, and Linda, if you would take a moment there you are. And Peter, let's begin. I want to be sure to try to include all three of you because all of you, each of you in your own capacity relevant to different issues in the legislature, do a tremendous job on behalf of the chamber and the business community. And while I know that's self-serving, I believe it sincerely. So just give us a look inside at one of the issues that you're working on this week or you expect to come up in the near future, Pete.
Well, this week, the Labor Committee is starting their public hearings, or in a more serious way, with some bills that we're watching. But today was an interesting development because, as you know, one of the issues that have been a bugaboo for me is the issue around concept drafts. And that's a bill that just says, this bill is a concept draft and it's designed to do X, and that's all you get. There's no language that helps you understand how it impacts the business community, individual businesses, whatever. And there was a bill scheduled today that was a concept draft. And we heard at the leadership summit that all four leaders were concerned with that going on, and they didn't want concept draft bills to go forward unless language was also available. So the committee actually canceled the public hearing today, set it aside, and is going to wait until language is actually available that we can react to. And that's important, because we can't give accurate, timely testimony on bills that we can't see. And the public can't comment on those bills unless they know what they're going to do as well. So I think that was a good step. I think it was a good step for the Labor Committee. I think it's a good step for the business community. We've got a real bill on Wednesday with language that deals with the cashing out of vacation pay. I expect that to be a lively public hearing. And that's what's on my list for this week.
So Ben, why don't you pick it up from there?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. The issue I'd really like to highlight this week is the expansion of broadband. I think that's the one topic that we've seen show up in our own report, Making Maine Work, the Economic Recovery Committee, and the governor's 10-year plan. And just recently, we saw a proposal that was listed out in the paper that Senator Rick Bennett is proposing a $100 million broadband bond to expand broadband here in the state of Maine, which is similar to a recommendation that we had in Making Maine Work. So in light of that and all the pieces of legislation surrounding broadband, we've taken the initiative to launch a 4-part broadband webinar series here put on by the state chamber. That's going to begin February 23rd, and notice will be going out on that shortly. But it's going to be a 4-part series looking at the federal and the state, federal level and the state level. We need to do it strategically so we can grow our economy based on that. Maine's the most rural state in America. And we know we need to expand broadband, and how we go about that is going to be the basis for this series. And knowing it's going to be a top legislative issue all during this session. And reflection just in the paper today was that article talking about a $100 million bond, which in Maine, we traditionally invest a couple $1 million a year. Recently, we passed a bond for $15 million. So $100 million is a significant amount, and how we go about that, I think, is going to be the important aspect. So that's a topic I wanted to highlight today, and I'll kick it back to you to talk to Linda.
That's great. Linda, last week you were the center stage talking about the conformity with the federal government in terms of our PPP loans and so forth. The governor has listened. She did respond, and there's a new initiative out that has not been made official, public yet, but this is what we understand it to be. So would you let our viewers know what we understand that to be?
Sure. Tax conformity has continued, and the Taxation Committee met several times last week, held work sessions. And as you recall, in the original proposal the governor made was, and this centers around primarily the PPP loans, the Paycheck Protection Plan loans that businesses were afforded by Congress. These loans are tax-free at the federal level, and really the issue is what is the treatment going to be at the state level here? The governor originally proposed to allow expenses to be deducted, as well as, but you had to add back those expenses into taxable income. So really, you were allowed to deduct them, but you had to add that amount back into taxable income. So the loans were going to be taxed, and at the federal level, they're not taxed. So businesses have really been very concerned around the state. We've heard from businesses, I'm sure the governor and legislature has as well. And so we hear, there's a rumor that the governor is proposing to basically allow for loans up to $1 million to allow businesses to deduct the expenses, and as well, those loans would be tax-free up to $1 million. That would probably take care of about 99.1% of the businesses out there. So that's significant. That's really significant. And the loans over the $1 million threshold would not be taxed. So that's where this stands. Again, we haven't seen anything in writing, but this is what we hear. So that is significant. And there's other proposals that we haven't heard anything about as well, namely with the FDII, the foreign derived intangible income provision, and some the other provisions that are under debate as well. So that's kind of the latest on the PPP loans, and that's really, I think, what a lot of folks are waiting to hear about.
Well, there's no certainty that this will be resolved this week. It is clear that starting on Tuesday of this week, that the intention of appropriations is to take up the biennial budget, which would encourage the legislature to try to get their arms around the supplemental budget, which is probably the major issue that stands in the way. So it's something that we'd like to think is more immediate than not in terms of a resolution, and the negotiations, as I've heard you say, are apt to take place this week.
Yeah, I mean, appropriations is really, their meeting schedule is to be announced. So yeah. Taxation has a work session scheduled on the supplemental on Thursday. So I'm assuming that negotiations are happening as we speak.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all three of you, and every week we will bring our viewing audience up to date on the issues that matter to them, and the issues that are at play in the legislature. For the remaining time, we will take a look at the main takeaway for this week. As you recall, last week, we drew a parallel based upon what we'd heard that particular day on the relevance between dealing with a pandemic, but also managing public policy in an effective way. We made note that you need timely and accurate information in both instances. We took note of the fact that really you should not take what you have for granted. There are special things about our state. There are special things that go on before the pandemic that we all need to take note of, and we all do not ever want to take them for granted. And we also realize that to be and to have the best results that we need for our people and our state and our economy, that we need to be working together. Well, this week, based upon what we've heard, it's appropriate to add another word, and that word would be access. And an accompanying word to that would be appreciation of that access. And let me put that in context for you. Last week, we heard from Senator Collins, who's taken a strong lead on the COVID-19 pandemic resolution from day one. Today, we also heard from a very articulate, knowledgeable senator that represents Maine extremely well. We're very, very fortunate that the two do serve us. Let me also go back to an event we had last Thursday and Friday mornings. We've had for 22 years a program called Leadership Summit. It's taken place in person at one of our premier ski areas in our state, Sunday River. Well, obviously this year it was not in person, it was virtual. It was 2 mornings. But here's what I want you to know. While we've talked about growing Maine's economy, it was so impressive to see the access that we had. We had our governor present, we had our 4 legislative leaders, our president, our speaker, our Republican leaders in both the House and the Senate. We had our 2 leading members of appropriation, the Senate Democratic chair, as well as the ranking leading Republican from the House, extremely knowledgeable, very articulate, very helpful in their information. We had the chancellor of the University of Maine, we had the president of the community college, we had the president of a private college, Thomas College. We had the chair of probably the most impressive and giving foundation, the Harold Alfond Foundation, in our history. Billions of dollars have been distributed throughout the state for education. I could go on, but let me stop there, because what you are witnessing by that particular description is what Maine has that makes it so special. Other states would love to have it. We have it in abundance. Only in Maine can you find that type of access. And why is it important? It's always important when the public and the private get together. It's always important when you can speak to your leadership at the government level. I said we have it in abundance here. We appreciate it. We will not take it for granted. It means the world to us, and we thank them for it. That is the main take for this week. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, not Monday, Monday being a holiday. Next Tuesday, right here at 3 o'clock. Until then, have a wonderful week. Look forward to seeing you next week at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. Take care.